is women's work? So, this episode is about women's work in art. And first and foremost, women have always worked. It is a very recent myth that women used to stay home and only take care of the kids. For the vast majority of history, women did the work that their family did. They helped in the business in some way or another. And as part of that, they did all kinds of things, and then they took care of kids and they cooked and they took care of homes. So women's work was lots of different kinds of things. The other thing I think we should remember is that art making is a business. So for most of history, art has been needed for things. So take, for example, in ancient Japan, the haniwa, as they're known, are these ceramic figures that help basically tell the story of Japanese life at the time, and they were used in tombs. And so the people who made them most likely traveled around and made them. And they weren't just the men, it was women and families as well. And so this was women's work. This would be the same in ancient Egypt. Yes, craftsmen were men, but that is a woman. And that's a woman because women whose husbands were craftsmen might be doing some of it. However, for most of history, women couldn't be the head craftsman, couldn't own the business. So they had to work as part of it, but didn't necessarily get the credit, and definitely had to do extra labor at home as part of it. That said, there is a category of art making and craftsmanship that was often relegated to women. So take the Norman Conquest in 1066. It resulted in probably the most well-known artwork that people don't realize is made by women. The Bayeux tapestry was made in 1080, and at this time, it's called a tapestry, but it's actually a 230-foot long, 230-ish feet long embroidery. And embroidery is one of those crafts that is for women. Why did embroidery become women's work? Well, a lot of textiles did, but embroidery particularly. And some people say it's because embroidery is something that, one, you could do like with kids around. It doesn't have like, saws and whatnot like carpentry. But the other thing about it is it was said to not change your humors, right? You're not going to like work up a sweat while embroidering. So it was seen as something that was women's work. And actually, embroidery very often then became something you see in convents, that nuns often made embroidery. And so there's a lot of belief that that was done by nuns. So more than 230 feet long. They took 10 years to make this. You want to guess how many women are on here? So there are 626 men, 193 horses, that's excluding all the other animals, 93 penises, but only 3 women. And that is one of the big challenges we see in general in understanding the arts that were often women's work. They are often not given credit. We often don't see them depicted even in the art they make. And so our story of what is women's work is often hidden from in history, like this, that you might have seen this a million times and not realized it was something that was women's work. The other thing about it is, so not only was embroidery women's work, they often worked in parts of producing it. So they might be working on the silk, but not designing the silk. They might be making the yarn, or in tapestries, they were often making the tapestry, literally weaving it, but not doing the design. So, for example, Raphael and Rubens both made tapestry cartoons. Cartoons is the name for the design that they use, the drawing that they use to make the tapestry. So, they don't get a lot of credit. They often work in only certain media, ones that are considered deemed appropriate for them. And then we move from this age of craftsmanship into the age of industrialization. And women maintain certain roles in society in terms of art making. So take ceramics. In ceramics, designing it was often not women's work, but coloring it was. And so you see colorists, for example, at Wedgwood. The colorists were often women. And so then in the late 19th century, you see more and more women trying to make a name for themselves in ceramics. And take Rookwood. Rookwood's a great turning point because it was started by a woman. It's a ceramics house in Cincinnati. And so you see women take what they used to be known for and then start to make a name for themselves. And you have other people like Dora Wheeler, who works as a designer. And then you have Clara Driscoll, who comes out of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Now, I will say there was still a lot of segregation. So these are called the Tiffany girls, not even women. And in Tiffany's workshop, he had women who are working on this because they were very good at color, purportedly, but they had to be unmarried and they had to live in the dormitory and follow certain rules. And then actually, this is also true about Disney. The colorists at the early animations were all women, but the people who designed it were men. So when does this change and how does it change? Well, what really happens is one, industrialization sort of changes the nature of making things, but also it changes with photography. So photography comes in, and women like Mary Cassatt are able to start moving away from art that has to have a function. It's really art for art's sake. And that's really what we see with, say, the Impressionists and how they are making art. So, like, Mary Cassatt here is also showing just a regular old day, and she's choosing to do this. This is not a commission. This is something she wanted to make because she wanted to put her name out there and her vision out there, and that's a massive change. And then from there, what we see is all kinds of other changes. So this is more than 100 years later after Mary Cassatt. But basically, in the last 100 or so years, what we've seen is from that point where artists can make what they want and put their vision out there, then the last change and what we see in society now is people like Bisa Butler are making art they want, but also the media that used to be associated with women, like quilting and textiles, is seen as fine art. So it's not just like a women's work. It's not just like a craft that like girls do and it's functional. It's actually something that is meant to be a beautiful artwork that should be showcased in museums. And so what we see is in this very long trajectory, we go from women's work being something that is for specific media or under the guise of men to something that women are able to use for their own voice. And then finally, where women can choose their media and they can say, this to me is the media I want to use. I want to celebrate the women before me and make something, and it gets to be celebrated as art. So what do we learn? Women's work is anything that a woman decides they choose to make as artwork. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, tell a friend.